You are listening to Christians in Corporate, the podcast that inspires corporate Christians to bring their full selves to work by shining a light on successful corporate executives and leaders across the globe. I'm your host, Paige Rakintarin. Let's get into it. This is the story of Dorothy Yang. Dorothy is a product and strategy executive who currently works as a product strategy director at Adobe. Now, Dorothy has over 15 years of experience in product strategy, marketing, operations, innovation, and so many other functions across numerous sectors. Now, while her nonlinear career may not make sense to the world, it certainly makes sense to God. It is clear that God has designed each missional assignment for her to serve as his witness. Now, in her personal life, Dorothy is blessed to be a wife to her husband, who's also a fellow engineer, and a mother to a 5-year-old beautiful little girl who is the joy of her life and always keeps her on her toes. Now, in this episode, Dorothy shares her journey coming into faith and shares how her childlike faith completely transformed her life and her career. There are so many God moments in her story. I know this episode will bless you tremendously. Enjoy. So, Dorothy, so great to have you here today. I am so excited because I know we connected in January. And I feel like this conversation is totally well overdue. I'm so excited to chat with you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for asking. I'm super excited to be here and just have a conversation.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. So before we get into the conversation, I did want to spend a few minutes asking you some quick fire round questions because I always feel like this is a great way to kind of get to know you a little bit more. They are work related. Maybe I should have thought about some non-work related ones, but it's still a great way to kind of get to know you. So these are this or that questions, right? So all you have to do is just choose one answer. Okay. Don't think too much about it. Freestyle. It's not that deep. And that's it. All right.
Sounds great.
You ready? All right.
Yes, I'm ready.
Work from home or work from the office?
Work from home.
Video call or phone call?
Phone call.
Email or live conversation?
Live conversation.
Are you an early bird or you're a night owl?
Early bird.
Tea or coffee?
Tea.
Music playing while you're working or silence?
Ooh, it depends.
It depends. Okay, if you had to choose one.
Music.
Music. Do you learn by doing or do you learn by seeing?
Doing.
Yeah. Do you have a tidy desk or a messy desk?
Messy desk.
Mine's messy too. Work until later with breaks or leave earlier without breaks.
Leave earlier without breaks.
Yes, high five. Okay, after work drinks or movie at home?
Oh, that's hard. We'll say movie at home.
Yeah, yes. Movie at home for me for sure. I used to think I liked the whole thing after work. No, I'm tired. I want to go to bed. I want to go to bed.
I think for this stage of life as a mom, that's why it's the movie at home.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, so let's get into it. Your story is definitely a rich story. I love your story. I can't wait to kind of talk through it. And just kind of tell our listeners how God has just been so faithful in your life. So starting from the beginning, it's always good to start from the beginning to understand where God really started the work in your life. So you were exposed to Christianity at a young age. I think, when we spoke, you talked about how you were exposed to Christianity around 5 when your family immigrated from China to the US. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So when my family immigrated, I need to go back a little bit. So my mom's side of the family is from what's called like the Bible Belt of China. So she was exposed to Christianity at a young age. And so when we moved to the States, she's a teacher by training, and she ended up finding a job at a church school where it was part of the job description to be on the worship team. And at the time, we weren't Christians yet, but since she was exposed to Christianity at a young age, she was open to it. And so it wasn't a big deal. But that's kind of how I personally started going to church, because my mom was working on Sundays on the worship team, and I was in fifth grade at the time. So didn't have much anything better to do. So as my brother and I, we went to church with her, and it was just really interesting because at some point down the line, I started actually paying attention to the sermons and heard this thing called prayer and thought I'd try it. I thought I'd, pray for something small. I don't remember what it was, maybe like, I don't know, an A on a test or something like that. And God answered. And I thought, there's something here. Let me learn a little bit more in terms of like who this God is. And so continued to go to church. And then we ended up going to a different church with a slightly better youth program.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to learn a little bit more about, God and what it meant to believe in him. And I am competitive by nature. So I think around the time I was in sixth grade, there were a bunch of other kids getting baptized. And I thought, I want to be baptized. So then I found out, I learned more about what it meant. And actually at the time, I thought being a Christian meant that you believed in God and that you believed in prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing about Jesus. And I thought I did. I was like, I believe in God and I believe in prayer. And again, wanted to be competitive and not left out. So got baptized when I was in sixth grade. And at the time I went to a Lutheran church. So what they do is they do child baptism and then they do the catechism classes afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So it was in one of those classes where I learned about Jesus. And I remember the pastor saying something like, all imperfect people, only perfect people can go to heaven, but we're all imperfect.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wait, I thought I signed up to be a Christian. I thought I was going to heaven. What happened? Did I sign up for the wrong thing? And then he said, that is why Jesus, the only perfect person, when he died, made all of us imperfect people then perfect and qualified for heaven. And that was when I really got it in terms of the concept of salvation and grace. And I just remember being so grateful in that moment. And I feel like my journey has really been one of childlike faith, where I didn't really understand what it meant to be a Christian. I got baptized.
Right.
And, God just kept helping me learn more about what it meant to be in a relationship with him and to be a follower. So that's sort of the early beginnings of how I came to faith and really understand what it means to have God in my life.
Yeah. No, I love that. And again, I remember when we connected, you talked a little bit more about finding out about your great grandmother. Do you want to share a little bit
yes.
about that?
Yeah, sure. So the reason why my mom was exposed to Christianity was that her grandmother, so my great grandmother, who I've never met because she passed before I was born, she was apparently a pastor in her village. And my mom told me these kind of crazy stories where she was illiterate, but she could read the Bible. And, if you think back to women in that time, they're not typically leaders in most societies, and yet she was a pastor, the spiritual leader for her village. And my mom essentially told me that she had such a powerful influence that when she passed, there were lines and lines of people out the door because of just like the many people she was able to impact with her ministry. So even though I've never met her, I've always felt her presence and her power just in my faith journey. And I feel like there's sort of that generational faith that I feel so privileged to carry.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. I think it's a great example of someone sowing a seed. I mean, obviously we don't even know the story before her, but like her sowing a seed prayers for, her grandchildren, her children, her great grandchildren, and how God has been faithful, right? And now have people like you, like your mother. So I think to me, it highlights the importance of just praying for generations to come, right?
That's right.
And
That's
so I
right.
love that. Okay, so you talked a little bit more about your journey into coming into faith, right? It's, when I think about your journey, I think it's definitely one where God guided you, right? And he kind of grew you. And I know you
Mhm.
shared your story about baptism and things like that, but you had one other story that I'd love for you to share
Yes.
about reading the Bible and what that looked like for you as you were
Yes.
growing in the faith.
Sure. Yeah, I really think there's so many examples of just God sort of taking my childlike faith and really growing that into understanding of who he is. So as I, got to know more about who he was, it's interesting. Maybe I was told, but I just don't remember in Sunday school, being specifically told like you should read like all the spiritual disciplines that now I know about. So I didn't know any better, but there's a couple of things that I happened to do, but now looking back, definitely led by God.
Mm-hmm.
One was I wandered back into the sanctuary one day, or in the back of the sanctuary where they have like all of the flyers and pamphlets, and I just picked up a devotional.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know anything about devotionals. I didn't know that was a thing. I just started reading it, and um I felt like every day it was very relevant to what I was going through at the time, and that was totally a God thing. Like I said, no one told me to read a devotional. And now looking back, it was actually there were a couple of cute moments where like I think they were asking for donations. So I mailed them cash because I had maybe a couple of bucks because I felt so impacted
Mm-hmm.
by the ministry. So I think that was one. And then the other one where I mentioned I'm, competitive and a bit of an overachiever. So as I was heading into high school, I have no idea from where, from somewhere that the King James version of the Bible is a great place to learn vocabulary. And I wanted to do well on the SATs. So I started reading the Bible, the King James version. Again, no one told me I needed to read the Bible on a daily basis, but I think I was, even though it was for the wrong purpose. God took that, and hey, I was learning about his story. That said, when I got to college and started reading NIV, it made much more sense without the
Exactly.
these and thous. And it was another opening, but I think that was another God thing where even though I didn't know what I was doing, he very clearly knew, and whatever it was that I read, it still, sat well with me, and I was able to absorb different parts of the Bible, even though it was in a very archaic language. And I thought it was so I could improve my vocabulary, but God saw that as a way to draw me closer to him. So yeah, another
Exactly.
example of childlike faith.
I love that because he probably was like, you know what, let me have someone tell her that it could be so that she can grow her vocab so that she could actually read my word. God is an intentional God. We think it's randomly happening, but I can assure you that probably was something that he wanted to do to make sure that you actually read the word. But honestly, I just want to
He
say
knew how to get to me.
right.
So
I just want to say shout out to the people who read KJV. Like there's some people who
yes.
grew up on it and would not even steer from it. I'm actually more of an ESV kind of person, which is, I guess,
Okay.
kind of old school. And but
Okay.
NLT is my like, if we really want
NLT is
to,
my current
yeah,
favorite right
NLT.
now.
But if we really want to do it, then we're doing Message or Amplify.
I love it. The message is a little too far modern for me, maybe coming from KJV, but no judgment to anyone who loved the message.
I'm just like, I
To
want to make
each
sure I
his or her own.
understand I want to make sure I understand it. It's funny because I was watching maybe it was at the church or something or TikTok. There's a new Gen Z version. I don't know if you've heard about that, where it's just like, and the brother said this, like, yo, man, like, and I'm like, what? Like, people are actually reading this. I'm like, you know what? I mean,
Whatever works,
whatever
whatever
works.
reaches the people.
Exactly. Want to make sure it's not
Yeah.
too diluted, but yeah, whatever works. And so I saw that and I thought that was hilarious. Okay. So we've talked about how you came into faith. We talked about your grandmother. We talked about how your mom obviously took you to church and all your spiritual disciplines that seemed like random happenings, but definitely it was God ordering your steps. So let's talk a little bit about growing older in the faith. Because obviously at this point you're older now, you go to college, you connect with friends there. Let's unpack that a little bit. How was your journey through college, and what did you experience during that time?
Yeah, college was such a transformational time for me spiritually. I think it was the first time I really got to encounter community.
Mm.
I think that, even though I, went to church starting from fifth grade and had a bit of a youth group, it was, mixed ages and like, a multi-generational. And I think college was the first time where I felt like I was in a place with so many like-minded people when it came to my faith, even if we were all really different from in terms of walks of life. So I had a really great group of freshman girls who I started doing Bible study with on a regular basis because of our college campus fellowship.
Mm.
And I grew so much through that type of community, so much so that I felt like I didn't want to go home because I was spiritually dry anytime I was removed from that community. And I think I also really learned about the spiritual disciplines. I learned there's a thing called quiet time. Never knew that before. I learned that it is good to read the Bible on a daily basis, not just for a good score on the SATs. Like things like that. And obviously being in community and fellowship with others, I just felt like, yeah, it was such a transformational time. And I think it was really there that God planted the seed of being a workplace missionary in my heart. And I also didn't know it at the time, but essentially what happened was as I was getting more involved in my campus fellowship, uh, I was starting to wrestle with this tension of why am I leaving the place that I am spending the majority of my time and going somewhere else to share about Jesus? Why can't I just share about Jesus where I was? So that kind of started planting a seed in my heart about like, how can I create some sort of ministry within my classmates? And so I was like, God, if I'm going to do this, I need a partner, not able to do this by myself. And by my junior year, he gave me a partner in crime. Her name is Amy, still friends to this day. And we started planning out these just like kind of like focus groups, but very casual types of sessions with our classmates. And a little bit of context, I went to Berkeley, which is a very big school, but I thought this was definitely God ordained that I was in a very small major where there were only about 100 of us per year. So we knew each other. Think about 100 people who are going through the same curriculum for 4 years. We knew each other really, really well. It was a really intense major. We, got kicked out of the library at 2 a.m. So we really got to bond and had our own sort of community in that way. And so what my partner in crime and I were trying to do is add on a layer of spirituality. So we had a lot of really great discussions of like, do you believe in a heaven and a hell? Do you believe in good and evil? There are just some really great discussions that we were able to start to have. And it was also just a good time to take a step back from all of the, workload that we had from school and really get to know each other as people. And so I think that really helped me see that I particularly felt like I had a calling to minister to people where I was. And I definitely super appreciate other people who are going to other places. I think for me in particular, I felt like that was more of the type of ministry and missions type of work that I was more drawn to. And it's interesting because I'll tie it back to something later, but I still keep in touch with a lot of those people today. And one of those people I actually am in the same company with right now.
Oh,
It's really
wow. That's
amazing how God is
amazing.
continuing those connections.
Yeah. No, that's great. I love everything you said, especially a couple of things. The community piece. I love how, because for me too, it's just like I really grew in my faith once I joined a community, right? And it could be a community at work, a small group at church. It could be a group of girls who pray.
Yep.
it's just, and I would say for me, it's all three are applicable, right? Joining a small group at church really changed my life.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing is I have a group of girls I pray with, and anytime we're just like, you know what, something has happened, let's pray, let's fast, let's do this, or even,
Yep.
just
Absolutely.
having that community, I think is life changing. So I love how you said that. But one thing I wanted to say that I love is the whole missions piece, right? I think that people have this mentality that like, oh, my mission, to have a heart for missions, I have to go to the other side of the world. Guess what? I got to take a 17-hour flight to some random island, then take a boat to another
No.
island, then
Yeah.
drive and then meet the village counselor. And that's where my ministry starts. And
Mhm.
it definitely isn't. So I love how you talked about, that's when you start getting a heart for your missions is all around you, right? Like the people around you.
Absolutely.
Why do you have to go to church and only, receive the people around you for you to minister to? So I love how
Mhm.
you said that. And I love the purpose discovery sessions, right? About, who am I? Why am I
Yep.
here?
Yep. Exactly.
I saw that. Hi, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this episode. I just had to interrupt this episode to see if you have purchased a copy of my book, The Quintessential Colleague. This book is a transformational career companion for every single corporate Christian, and it will help you grow in income, impact, and kingdom influence. Now, when you purchase this book, there are a ton of career tips and proven strategies that you can implement immediately in the workplace. There are also a ton of real life examples and faith-based exercises to help reinforce the key teachings. And then lastly, there are some prayers because everyone needs prayer. But there are some prayers and career declarations that will help transform and turbocharge your career. So if you are ready to discover the secrets to getting promoted, to getting paid, to finding purpose in your workplace, then purchase this book right now. The link is in the bio. Now back to the podcast. Okay, so we've talked about you being in college, you started the discovery classes, you're still connected with a couple of them today, which is super exciting. Let's talk about how God used you in your workplace. But before we do that, actually, let's talk about your actual journey into the workplace. So you finished from Berkeley,
Yep.
4-year intense course, and then what happened next?
Yeah, I started out my career, and again, I really think these are all missional assignments from God. I started my career through a 2-year rotational leadership development program. So I got to spend 8 months in a different location, different industry, and then like different office and also function to start out my first 2 years. And it felt like a missions trip every single time because it was, a community of people I was getting to know in Los Angeles, and this was all through Johnson and Johnson's leadership development program. And then I got a chance to go to Pennsylvania, and that was really neat because I met some people. I got to work with people on the manufacturing floor, and some of them were Christians and really understood this missional assignment that I was on. And then in New Jersey, I got a chance to work in supply chain for some, of like stents and types of medical devices in New Jersey. And I would say the common, not just through those three roles, but also ones after that, the common thread is that I think that I am someone who might be like a waterer when you think about someone who plants seeds, someone who waters them, and then someone who harvests. I don't know that I've seen a ton of people come to Christ through me directly, or so I'm not like at the end of that cycle, or not the end, but it's really the beginning.
Right.
But what I've noticed is that in almost all of my work situations, I meet a lot of people who have some exposure to Christianity and just want a safe place to ask questions. So I've done a lot of like Bible studies just organically with people. We like the Pennsylvania assignment I mentioned. I met with a group of women actually through a Bible study group that we would meet on a weekly basis. And when I was in LA, there was someone who was really exploring Christianity and she had a lot of questions. So we had like a one-on-one Bible study. And then there were some things that I did in New Jersey as well. So I feel like God keeps sending people my way who just have questions. And for whatever reason, He has crafted my personality to help explain the faith to people who are curious already,
Mhm.
but just need a little bit more room to be able to ask questions.
Yeah.
Like someone asked me, this happened like 2 years ago. Someone asked me, what is a prayer request? And I was like, oh,
Mm.
wow, that is such a Christianese word.
Right.
And then I had to explain that. I was like, well, it's kind of like what's top of mind for you? Like, are there concerns that you might have? And so, because she's like, people keep asking me, what is my prayer request? I have no idea what that means. And it's always a really good gut check to, do I know how to explain my faith to someone who isn't as exposed to it? So it's always been really good in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. And then so then actually talking about your journey, because I think that God has definitely directed your path in terms of your
Mhm.
actual career journey and
That's right.
how he has spoken to you and how you've obeyed and again weaving in that whole childlike faith.
Mhm.
And so let's talk a little bit about that. I know you've had a couple of encounters where times where you just had to be obedient, where when things didn't even look like they were going to pan out, when things just looked crazy, but God
Yeah.
spoke to you in that chaotic moment, and as you obeyed,
Yeah.
you did a couple of things great. So let's unpack a couple of those things.
Yeah. And I think maybe in kind of like at the high level, I would say that my career journey to a normal person doesn't really make sense because it's not vertical, it's not linear, but it absolutely makes sense to God because it's the journey that He's taken me on. And again, it's these like missional assignments. So for the first 10 plus years of my career, I spent working in different segments of healthcare and a little bit of consumer products. So whether it's pharmaceuticals, medical device, hospital, health insurance, I thought I was going to be in healthcare forever.
Mhm.
I've always wanted to work at the intersection of healthcare and technology. So in 2019, while I was working at Kaiser Permanente, I started just looking and exploring for other jobs. And that was a really interesting journey because I essentially looked for jobs for about 2 years.
Mm.
And it was frustrating at times. I had to take breaks and then get back on the search. And I think it was part of the reason why it was frustrating is I would always get to the end of a process, be like the one of the final candidates, only to be told something happened. So there was one major tech company who gave me all of the comp details verbally and then told me that I didn't have the offer. So they kind
Wow.
of like rescinded. So it didn't make sense. I don't really know what happened. There was another healthcare company that they brought me on site and like had someone help me with think through housing options. And they were at the end of the day said they weren't sure if I was passionate about healthcare, even though I spent
It's
over
10
a
plus
decade of my
years.
career working. So again, all these things and then there's another one where I think the hiring manager left the company, so they had to close out the rec. So I think after a while, I realized I was like, okay, God, clearly I'm not supposed to move right now. So I will stay put and figure out what it is that you have to say. So 2 years later in 2021, right around January, February timeframe, I get my first official offer. And I am so excited because it is in writing. Yes, it is in writing. It looks like it's gonna, go through, not gonna be rescinded. And I am ready to accept this offer. I have to provide a response by Friday, and I would and say like leading up to that week, all the way up till Wednesday, I'm like, I'm ready. I'm ready to go.
Let me
Ready
know.
to accept this. Sorry?
I was gonna say you're probably like, send me the link. I'm ready to sign.
Yes. And I was like getting excited about it. And then Wednesday night, I get an email from a recruiter at what was then Facebook and now Meta about a role on the faith partnerships team at Meta. And so, first of all, I had no idea this team existed at a place like Meta. That's one. And then two, I was a little surprised because I worked in healthcare my entire career. I've never fully worked, I've never done full-time ministry, even though I am a person of faith. So I just thought it was really interesting. And keep in mind, I have an offer that I need to respond to that Friday. I reach out to the recruiter and I say, "Hey, when can we chat?" She tells me the earliest she can chat is Monday. So I realized that I had to make a decision about the only official offer I got in 2 years before hearing about this other seemingly amazing opportunity that I know nothing about.
Right.
And so on Thursday, I felt like, remember that the recruiter email happened on Wednesday night, and
Mhm.
on Thursday, my spirit started to shift,
Mm. Mhm.
and I started to not feel as into the offer that I had received. And at some point, I realized I needed to turn it down.
Ooh.
But I was so upset about it. I literally called I forget I think it was the hiring manager. I told her I was turning it down. And then I hung up the phone. Gosh, I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. And then I went back to my husband and I cried my eyes out,
Mm.
because I realized I felt like I was so foolish because
Mhm.
here I finally have a tangible offer
Right. Right.
and I was turning it down for what? I didn't know what this Facebook role would be, if it'll ever pan out to anything. But I was so upset about it. But at the same time, I was so sure that it was the right decision.
Mm.
And I felt that way throughout the weekend. Fast forward,
That's
that
a
was February 19th when I turned down the role. It was not a leap year. So exactly a month later, on March 19th, I got the call that I got the role at Facebook. And it was
mm.
in a higher salary than the other role that I had turned down would have been. And it was a role I was really excited about because I get to work with faith-based organizations, something that I know in my personal life, but I have never worked with in a work setting. So I just felt like that was such a God thing
Yeah.
that as soon as I let go of what I thought was the right thing, then God really showed me what more he could deliver
Yeah.
and what he could provide and how big of a God he is.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many lessons in that. And I really pray that that story blesses someone. And someone could be going through that right now, right? Where
Yes.
they're like, they've been trying to get out, they finally got an offer, they just don't know, or something else comes that looks even more promising, and they're deciding between the two. But you know,
Yeah.
what I'm learning from that story is, one, your obedience. Two, being sensitive to the voice of God. It's almost like it was a conviction. It's not like you needed to hear a voice from the heavens, don't take the job. Like that wasn't the vibe.
Yeah.
It really was that you just
No,
felt it. There was a shift
I felt it.
and
Yeah.
you were obedient in that shift, and you flowed. You flowed with the Holy Spirit in that shift. And um
Yeah.
it took you to where you needed to go at that time, right?
Yeah, and I think what's really amazing is a lot of people are like, "How did you make the transition from healthcare to tech?"
Mm.
And I just have to tell them, that I have to share God's story,
Yeah.
and what a way to be able to be a witness. I actually was just talking to someone last week, and
Mm.
he is also a person of faith, and he asked me because he's looking to make a similar transition, and I was like, honestly, it was all God.
Yeah.
Now, what I didn't share just yet is that prior to the Facebook recruiter reaching out to me, I had applied to Facebook multiple times,
Mm.
gotten to final rounds or maybe close to it, and didn't get the job.
Mm.
And so I had actually was like, okay, maybe this is just not the place for me. I won't like continue. But it was because of those rejections that's how the recruiter had me in the database.
Mhm.
So I share this in case anyone is, I know it's a tough job market out there, but not every rejection is just a rejection. You never know what may come of it. And even though I was rejected from those roles, after I joined Facebook, I reconnected with the people I interviewed with and ended up working really closely with some of them and benefited from the relationships that I had built through the interviews.
Yeah.
So you just never know how each and every conversation could lead to something down the line, even if it's a rejection right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. And I really hope that speaks to someone who has been in the job market for a while. They don't know what to
Yeah,
do. They've applied to their top 10 companies. No one's responding. As you said, there is a database, but ultimately God is the mega database, right? And it's
exactly.
praying that,
Exactly.
like, they search your name, they search a keyword, whatever it is. But I love that
Hmm.
story because it's a story of surrender, it's a story of patience, it's a story of obedience, it's a story of being open and sensitive to God's guiding and prompting, no matter how you felt, right?
Yes.
So I love
Yes.
that. So you were at Facebook, so you were in a faith-based role. I mean, that's just such an amazing role where you got to work and connect with mega churches across North America. Is that?
Yeah. One of my proudest accomplishments during that time is actually partnering with a really big church, one of the biggest Black churches in the South, to run a COVID vaccine campaign when vaccines were being rolled out. And through the power of Facebook and Instagram ads, we were able to drive over 100 people to get vaccinated at an event that they held. And so I just felt like it was so much God working through that, and that I don't know I would have been able to have that tangible impact from healthcare. And yet I had that healthcare impact from Facebook/Meta at the time.
Right. Right. I love that. I love that. So you spent a few years at Facebook and then you decided you wanted to do something new. Let's talk about the journey
Yes.
into the something new.
Yes.
So how did that pan out? How did you take those steps?
Yeah, so I would say that my journey to Meta, the first year, it was the dream job. I mean, I was doing very social impact focused things, and yet I was able to rely on the power of this big technology platform. The second year, I would say, is probably starting about the midpoint in 2022. I think because layoffs were looming, the culture started to change. And I would say also my role started to change. So I thankfully found a lot of favor and was able to get a much larger scope where I wasn't just working with faith-based organizations, but also other community-based organizations, and seeing how we might take their product, take their feedback to influence product development all throughout the life cycle of a product. Um, and so I think starting from July 2022, the culture started to change a little bit. And, I think unfortunately, layoffs sometimes bring out the worst, honestly, in all of us, because it's a very tense environment. So I got to a point where I felt like I was no longer in a healthy environment for me to continue. And right around the time Meta had its first layoffs in November, I thankfully survived the layoffs. I also, because of knowing that layoffs were coming, I was interviewing and exploring other roles. I actually had two offers at that time, and they were with companies I would have loved to work for. And ultimately, I felt God tell me I needed to turn them down,
Mm.
and that I needed to wait until March. I needed to stay at Meta until at least March. Uh, I didn't know why, but that's kind of what I felt he was saying to me in my
Yeah.
spirit.
And quick thing, because I want to make this like super tactical for folks. What does that look
Yeah.
like when God's telling you to turn that down? Like, is it like a conviction? Do you not feel a peace?
Yeah.
Just so that people know, when it looks good on paper, but maybe it's not what God wants you to do.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's different for everyone, but I think as I have continued to grow in my walk, it's kind of like that Bible story where they say that, like, there was a big rush of wind, but God wasn't in that rush of wind. But I think for me, it's that still small voice,
Mm.
that when I'm in the quiet or in a state of flow and connection, I would say, or just very present,
Mm.
that's when I get this conviction or this feeling or this like gut sense, which I am attributing to God.
Yeah.
Because I think at the time I was also going through some personal things, like my dad had an injury, and I just felt like it was a lot to think through on top of offers. So I think that was an element of it. And I think sometimes what happens is as I'm processing through decisions, whether it's journaling or like taking a walk or something, I'll just get this still small voice or this sense that, like, okay, I think I'm supposed to just let these go. And it's in some ways it's very similar to kind of what I experienced prior to Meta. And again, didn't really make sense because here I am in the middle of layoffs. Who knew if I would survive another round? And again, here are these two great offers, but God told me to turn them down, so I did. And He told me to wait until March, so I did. And what's really interesting is that in February, I got promoted.
Wow.
And I think that may have been, and by the way, that promotion was probably should have happened a little bit earlier. And there were certain factors that didn't allow that to happen. So I do wonder if that was something that was tied to it. Um, and so after March, I had a candid conversation with God to say, okay, God, like what
What are
now?
you doing?
and and this is where I want to be super candid. I don't know if I heard anything. And maybe he was talking, but maybe I wasn't listening.
Right.
So sometimes he is always talking, but we're not necessarily listening
Yeah.
and really in tune. And that's why I'm saying when I'm really in tune, I'm able to hear that still small voice.
Yeah.
So I think the other part of it, I was like, okay, well, I'm not hearing anything. Maybe I should just figure it out, right? I'm not someone who likes to give up. I like to figure out how to make the present situation work, even if there might be some unhealthy elements. So I was trying to do everything I could to make the situation work.
Mm.
Um, and also, I think reflecting on the last job search, I really didn't want to go through another job search because it's a really bad market. The last time it took me 2 years. Gosh, it's going to take a really long time. And I just kept trying to make it work, kept trying to make it work, until I think about summer last year. I just experienced a couple of instances where I realized I was like, I'm starting to act out of character.
Mm.
And I felt like I was doing all of the things, like I was talking to a therapist regularly. Big fan of that, in case
Yes.
anyone is thinking
Go
about
to
it. No judgment.
therapy. Yeah.
No judgment.
Yeah.
Yes. Good for everybody. It's not just for, a certain demographic of people. It's good for
Yeah.
everybody. I
Yeah.
was talking to a therapist. I was trying to like eat better. I was trying to exercise. So I felt like I was doing all of the things. And so I was talking to God. I was like, okay, what else? What else am I not doing? And there was a moment where I just realized I need to let this job go.
Mm-hmm.
And not that I was, leaving right away, but just I needed to stop trying so hard to make it work
Yeah.
because maybe it wasn't the place for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that probably happened at the beginning of August. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna be more chill about everything. And I started, casually browsing and looking for jobs. I applied to maybe like 2 or 3 things that first week of August. Um, and I think once I let things go, God moved
Mm.
at lightning speed. And I think what I learned in that is I was letting go of good to make room for great.
Mm.
And here's more details around that. So first week of August, I applied to these roles. Within about 3 weeks, I got an offer for one job. And then I was one of 2 remaining candidates for another job. And I couldn't believe it.
Yes.
I myself was so in shock. It's like 3 weeks from application to offer in this job market for 2 roles. I can't make this stuff up. This is 100% God.
Wow.
And I really think it was because I fully let things go. And the offer led to the job that I have now. And there were just a lot of open doors in that. One, the job was so similar to what I did at Meta, which is very niche. It's like a role that mixes product management, product marketing, strategy, and user research.
Wow.
That's not a role you find every day.
Yeah.
And that's why I was also scared. I was like, God, where am I going to find a job? How are people going to understand what it is that I did at Meta? This team 100% understood it because it's in the same niche. The person that, and this is going to circle back to my college story, the person who referred me for that role is one of the people we had in our focus groups back in college. And he's now a Christian. He was not prior when we were in college. I didn't see him come to faith, but I like to think I may have played a little bit of a role in his journey.
Some.
Yeah. So it's really great to see that. And then even my current boss, who was interviewing me at the time, she mentioned, gosh, it's really uncanny how what you did at Meta is so similar to what we're doing. And so I took that as a sign from God that that was the role I was supposed to take. And again, I think it just took me to let go of the good, because who doesn't want to work for Meta? And that's why I think I try to make it work for so long. Like, gosh, I'm so privileged to have this job in this such a well-known big tech company. Let me just make it work. But God's like, no, I have something even better for you, specifically for you. Not to say anything bad about people who work at Meta. There's lots of great people who are still there. That transitioned me to this role. And I think it's really a testament of how he truly knows what's best for us, even if we may not understand it at first.
I love that. And I think for me, as you just told that story, is the power of surrender, right? Like, you were trying to make things work for yourself. I can do this. Praise God. No, God wants us to surrender. Like, and as you said, letting go of good to make make room for great. God always has something better for us, right? It's like our life should never be stagnant. It should always get better and better. The Bible says that the latter shall be greater than the former, meaning that things should progress, things should move. We should never be stagnant. And so for anyone listening, I really hope it's, they understand the power of surrender, the power of letting things go, the power of not doing things, trying to do things for yourself, but letting God take control. And be patient with it. And as you do that, the Bible says he's able to do exceedingly abundantly, more than we can ever ask or think. And I always imagine, like, if you go to Amplify, there's all different ways to say it, but like, more than we can think, imagine, expect. It's just amazing. And so, that's how I feel. Is that something you feel too?
I was gonna quote the same verse, Ephesians 3:20. I feel like that's carried me both in and out of Meta, because the faith partnerships job, I didn't even know it existed. I couldn't have imagined it. And even the job I have now, again, I didn't know that it would have existed, or I couldn't have imagined it either. So I think it really speaks truth to me in both circumstances.
Yeah. I love that. Dorothy, this was such a great conversation. I had such a great time as we kind of talked through everything. We talked through, I mean, again, as we said, your story really is one that builds upon, starting from childlike faith, going to church because your mom had to go to church, it was part of the job requirement, to randomly, learning how to read the Bible in KJV. And getting baptized because, everyone else around you was getting baptized, but then coming across, the devotional, learning, praying because you wanted to get an A, like all these things that seemed accidental, but they clearly weren't. There was something that God had definitely put in your path, knowing that he was going to use you greatly in the workplace. And I love, how God definitely has showed up in your career and how he's using you to minister to people in the workplace. I think that's so important as corporate Christians, that we are able to not only be excellent in the work that we do, right? Because we need to lead by
Yep.
example as Christ
Yep.
ambassadors, but also
Mhm.
minister to people around. And ministering to people around doesn't necessarily mean that we're carrying a Bible saying, thou art, God, no, that's
Exactly.
not the vibe.
Exactly. Yeah.
It means showing up, living a life of excellence. And I think that
Mhm.
as we do that, we are lights and people begin to be more attracted to us and start asking questions. As you were
100%.
saying, that like people will come up to you and they want to learn more.
Yeah.
Is that something that you usually experience?
It's really interesting because, like, for example, at Meta, I would be surprised that sometimes my reputation preceded me.
Mhm.
Like, people will, across the broader team would be like, "Oh, I would love to work with you. I've heard great things." I was like, "Oh, great." I didn't know that my reputation sort of
Yeah.
carried me in that way. So I think it's definitely something that we get to witness for God. And I'll also just speak to, the last boss I had at Meta. She was also a Christian, and I think she really helped me see what it could look like to be a Christian in the workplace. And she was also what was very impactful for me to, in those tough moments, to know how to respond from a place of faith. So I
Mhm.
think even if, you're interacting with Christians, you could be a blessing to other people. And one other thing I want to quickly share is there were a couple of roles that I've had in my career where I would kind of ask God, like, why did you put me here for this role? And I think it's been really convicting. There was one time God said something like, well, maybe it's not about you and your career. Maybe I'm placing you there for someone, whether it's a boss, whether it's a coworker, or, in my case, I was a healthcare facility. It was like maybe a patient that you're supposed to minister and speak to. So I think that was really powerful for me to sort of have that shift and think that, yeah, it's not about me. It's all about what God wants to accomplish through me and how can I be a vessel for him in the place that he's placed me.
Yes, we were created for God's glory. Whatever we
That's right.
do, we were created for his glory and to expand his kingdom
Mhm.
wherever we are. So I love that. This has been such a rich and great conversation. And I know that so many people are going to take things away because you were real. You were real about it. There was no sugarcoating. You spoke the
No,
truth. And God gets the glory in your story, and I know He's going to continue
absolutely.
getting the glory as you continue in your impactful and awesome career. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, let's stay connected.
Yeah, would love to. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, if
This is
people want to
great.
find you and learn more about you, what's the best way?
Best way is to find me on LinkedIn.
Okay,
Yeah.
Dorothy Yang. So, all right. Thank you so much for your time, Dorothy. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Christians in Corporate podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I would love to hear your feedback. So please be sure to comment down below or connect with me on social media using the handle @PageRakinTarin. Oh, wait, and one more thing. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content just like this. See you in the next episode.